I'm a professional.
So say again, Luke 10.
What?
Where are we?
Luke 10. Luke 10 is where we are, dear listener and student. We're going to be in verse 25 to start, because as we know, it is always good to get the context to a parable before we jump into it, lest we miss what Jesus is trying to do. So we're just going to read through this whole thing, all the way to verse 37. And as we go, we're going to be asking the quintessential question of this class, which is, what's weird? Hey, that's when you know you're doing something right. Is when you've got the Dora the Explorer voice coming back. So yeah, you've heard this before. You've definitely heard this before. So turn off that part of your brain that has heard this before and knows how it goes and fills in all the blanks, and try and hear it for the first time. And notice, both in the parable and outside the parable, what might strike you as strange, odd, weirdly specific, problematic, offensive, nonsensical, what have you. So Luke 10, verse 25. I was up late, so I'm going to sound like this all morning. Now, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" The expert answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But the expert, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, but when he saw the injured man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came up to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was traveling came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he felt compassion for him. He went up to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever else you spend I will repay you when I come back this way.' Which of these 3 do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The expert in religious law said, "The one who showed mercy to him." So Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." All right. Let's start listing weird stuff, or stuff that stands out to us as strange in this whole passage.
The guy just asked, "Who is my neighbor?" expecting an answer of people who live next door. And Jesus goes into this big old story about guy on the
What was a
road.
man?
So are you pointing out the weirdness of answering with a story, or the weirdness of the question?
Both.
Both,
I mean,
okay.
The question's weird, and
Yeah.
the answer is a weird answer to that
Weird question, weird answer. I mean, I used to say that as a classroom teacher. You ask weird questions, you're going to get weird answers. But yeah, this strikes us as an odd question. Not a question most of us probably explicitly ask. What else?
Who is the injured man?
Who is this? Who is the victim? Not like which person's the victim, but like literally who is this person who becomes the victim of robbers? An interesting question. There's all kinds of scholarly speculation about if Jesus is telling a story about something that actually happened, which we literally don't know. But some people think that maybe he is. I'm not sold on that personally. I think Jesus is just good at stories, but maybe. Yeah.
Put oil and wine on the wounds.
Yeah, that's
basically salad dressing.
Yeah. Yeah. He dresses his wounds, 1,000 Mile Island style. Couldn't think of any dressings just then. No honey mustard. Yeah.
Jesus uses two examples of Jews who passed by the victim, both
Ah.
a priest and a Levite.
Okay. Priest and Levite equal the bad example or the negative example. That's kind of strange. We might think that's normal because we
Jewish
tend
leadership.
to be less than fans of Jewish leadership generally when we find them in Scripture, but a bit surprising.
It seems like he's going from like a very important religious figure to kind of important, and then to just regular person.
Yeah, there's kind of, I don't want to say a spiral downward, but there's like, yeah, decreasing authority happening here. We're going from someone who has quite a bit of authority and status and responsibility to someone who still has quite a bit, but a little bit less, which we've been talking about numbers, and then to someone who has seemingly no authority. We don't even know really what this Samaritan is about. He apparently has some money because he has an animal and he has oil and wine that he can pour out. But apart from that, we don't really know anything about this person.
Well, he's got some coins in his pocket too.
He's got some coins.
So
Yes.
he's
Doing all right. Might be a merchant, might be a tradesman of some kind, or just a wealthy guy. Although he seems to be by himself, so that's also kind of weird, given how dangerous this road is. Anything else? Yeah.
The structure of the story completely flips what the question is. I mean, and some of this appears here, but the victim, if you think of the question, the victim should be important. And you would anticipate that who the victim is, their identity would be important, but that's completely backgrounded.
Yes.
And instead it's the other, there's a lot of detail about the other characters. Right?
Yes.
If you're asking who is my neighbor, it should be the victim, right? But
Right.
it's not. Like and of course he says, who is the neighbor to the, he flips it, in the end, rhetorically also.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus is really good at not answering questions. Sometimes he is very direct, other times he's wildly indirect, and other times he just doesn't answer the question at all. And this seems to be a case of Jesus just doesn't answer the question at all. Because you're right, if some scholars point out that Jesus has to clarify at the end there which of the three, because otherwise, if you're asked who's the neighbor, it's the guy on the road, right? Because when we think about who's my neighbor, we're often thinking about who are we supposed to be good to? And so in that case, it should be this guy, who also, as we pointed out, we don't know anything about. We can presume he's probably Jewish, but we don't know that. We don't know anything about his status, or his place in society. We don't know, if he ever, cheated on his finals or anything. He's just a guy who had an unfortunate encounter. Yeah, anything else stands out as strange?
Was it really necessary for the robbers to beat him up that badly?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. A lot of people looking at that question would say probably the man resisted in this case, because normally, there's no need for violence unless you're putting up a fight. So there's a guy who put up a fight and then was badly, had lost the fight.
And I don't know if this is, I don't know enough to know. For lack of a better term, would a lay person have read or interpreted the scripture? Or would they have left that to the profession?
What do you say more?
Jesus asked him, how do you read the law?
Yes. So this whole conversation, this is kind of an odd dialogue between Jesus and this guy. So let's unpack this a little bit, because as has become a tradition now in this class, I'm going to try and make this guy a lot more sympathetic than we probably read him, because there are plenty of anti-Jewish readings out there. You can go find them in droves. So let's do a different one. So let's talk about this conversation because it's strange. First of all, one of the things we know about this guy, who is he? What do we know about him, this guy who talks to Jesus here?
Expert in the law.
Expert in the law. So the Greek word here is nomikos. So this is a literal class of person in Jewish society. They were founded They kind of came into being during the Babylonian exile. And we talked about this some with the trilogy we looked at, Parables. These are people whose whole job was to know Torah, so they're well-read. There's a good chance they can write, but they can definitely read. So they're experts in Torah who help kind of deliberate on Torah law for the community. Because otherwise, it's real easy to get assimilated by an empire if you don't know what your faith actually is. So this is a guy who knows Torah really well, would have been known as someone who knows Torah. He's probably wearing certain kinds of clothes, has some level of status within society. So the fact that he's asking Jesus this question is kind of pertinent, because he's not just some random Joe Schmo. He's a guy who everybody kind of knows his Torah. So he asked this question. Well, let me ask this. What's your reading on this guy? What's your take on this guy?
Arrogance.
Okay, arrogant, yeah. Seems like he thinks he has all the answers.
So he was trying to justify himself, so maybe that was like he really wanted to know, or he was being arrogant.
Yeah, that is an interesting part of this whole puzzle here. We're gonna come back to that. So arrogant, he seems to be justifying himself. Luke tells us that. What do we think he's doing? What's he up to?
He was trying to put him to the test.
Okay, so he's trying to, that's the word that Luke uses, is to test Jesus. How do we read that? Why, or maybe here's a better question. Why would he be trying to test Jesus?
I think I may see where you're going with this, because I've always read that as he's trying to trap,
Right.
knock him down, put him in that category. You're wrong, but just the way you're going here, I think it might be that he's just, I heard somebody just flip on the radio the other day about we're always trying to justify ourselves, find ourselves something in the law so that we can say we did good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's doing that.
Maybe, yeah.
So, I think there was a big debate about eternal life within the Jewish leadership going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It occurs to me he may, when you see the word test, I mean, I don't know whether it was clear to the parties whether Jesus was on one side or the other.
Mm. Yeah, so let's think. Like, this guy isn't asking because he, doesn't know the answer, right? That's pretty clear, given that he answers as soon as Jesus asks him. So he's got some other motives going on here. So possibly, we see in other parts of the Gospels that religious leaders try to trap Jesus in his words. So maybe that's going on. Maybe there's kind of a trap being laid here of getting Jesus to trip up somehow. That could be there. It also could be, here's this upstart rabbi walking around. If we look just before this, we see that he's had quite a successful ministry. He just sent out 72 people who went out and were casting out demons and healing diseases and all kinds of stuff. So we've got a bit of a mega church potential happening here. And so you've got someone who is an expert in the law, who very well what he might be doing is what you might do if you moved somewhere and you went to a church for the first time and you wanted to make sure they were really legit, right? You want to make sure they're on the up and up. So what might you do? You might go to the pastor of that church and be like, hey, what's the gospel? Explain the gospel to me. Not because you don't know, but maybe because you're trying to see if they know. You're trying to suss out if they're, on the level with all that. Now, what we're talking about, let's take a real quick pause. Again, this is becoming a tradition in my class. This word. Good Lord, I wish English was better at translating these things. Eternal life. What is that?
The kingdom.
The kingdom. Yes. When is the kingdom? Now and forever. Right? Kingdom is happening, will happen forever. what do we typically read this as?
Second life.
Second life. Yeah, oh, I like how you put that. That's good. Yeah, so like heaven, right? Afterlife. And again, as we've said many times, many times, there's another phrase for this, which never, well, maybe not never, maybe in John, almost never shows up in the Gospels, and it's the world to come. If we're not saying the world to come, we're not talking about the afterlife. So what we are talking about here is not so much a quantity of life or like a destination, but like a kind of quality of life. It is weird that he says inherit. That seems strange. And that kind of lends us toward maybe viewing this more as heaven. But what we can basically, what this guy seems to be saying is, what do I have to do for God to give me the kind of life that he wants people to have? To be in God's kingdom and to be doing what God does. Because, that is, in the sense of inheritance, that is kind of a gift, right? Only God can give me that. So what do I have to do to be living the kind of life that kind of breaks me out of the rat race or the world or whatever and be living God's life instead? Because also, case in point, if this is about heaven, Jesus gives the wrong answer, right? This guy is basically going up to Jesus and like, what's the gospel? And he doesn't say the correct answer. Jesus is wrong. So Jesus also, though, doesn't answer the question. What does he do?
Turns it back.
Turns it back. He says, how do you read it? Right? What do you think it says? And this teacher of the law gives two answers, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. That's from Deuteronomy. And love your neighbor as yourself. Now, as Caleb kind of alluded to, this is touching on a debate within rabbinical thought at the time. In this time period, we have kind of two big hitters in the world of rabbis that get talked about quite a lot. We have Hillel, we have Shammai. If you read Talmud and things like that, Shammai is always a big old doofus, and Hillel is a good guy. Because Hillel's followers survived to the temple being destroyed, basically. Every rabbi, if you ask them what is the most important commandment, they're going to say the same thing. They're going to say the Deuteronomy thing. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. However, within Judaism, there's this idea of like commandments taking precedence over each other. There might be times where certain things that Jews are supposed to do are in conflict with each other. Jesus talks about this. Like if your donkey falls into a ditch on Shabbat, then you're supposed to keep Shabbat, so you're not supposed to work, and getting a donkey out is work. But also, that's like a valuable possession / life there. So which of those things takes precedence, saving a life or a Shabbat? So, if you were to ask a rabbi, what's the greatest command? You know what the answer is. The next question is, what is the second greatest command? Which is why when Jesus is asked this in other Gospels, he says the second is like it. Now, Hillel says this. Love your neighbor as yourself. Quoting Leviticus 19. Jesus is not being novel here. He's just going back to Torah. Most of the time when we think Jesus is doing something new, he's just going back to Torah. That's what Jesus does. Shammai says this. So, it's not that Shammai doesn't think you should love your neighbor as yourself. He does. He just thinks that if there is a mitzvah, a Torah commandment, that you need to follow, and you are in a conflict between loving your neighbor and following Torah, you should follow Torah. So Shammai says devotion / purity is more important than loving neighbor. And if you're like, haha, that's dumb, think about it for a while and think about how the church has historically done some things. And this becomes maybe a little more of a meditation on why he might be doing that. Hillel, however, says that if you're going between following Torah, following the law, following a mitzvah, and following loving your neighbor, that you should do that. So Jesus is basically signaling, so this teacher in the law is signaling that he is in the Hillel camp. Neighbor takes precedence over following the law to the letter. And what does Jesus say to this guy?
Good answer.
Yeah, good job. Ding, ding, ding. Gold star. And then starts to move on. Then we have this very weird phrase in Luke, which I frankly find very abrupt, because so far this conversation has been fairly standard. This is like a pretty standard like student-rabbi conversation. You ask a question, rabbi asks you a question. You have kind of a back and forth with Torah, and that's it. However, Luke tells us that this guy wants to justify himself. So what might that mean? That word justify, in this case, seems to mean in the Greek wanting to appear righteous or show that you are being righteous in some sense, which isn't necessarily bad. You don't want to be misunderstood, or you don't want people to misinterpret what you're doing. So why does he want to justify himself? Maybe he's like, doggone it, Jesus, you got me. I was going to trick you, and you tricked me, and now I'm done tricked, so now I need to recover somehow. Could be this guy is auditioning to be a disciple, and he's trying to keep Jesus' attention, right? He's trying to keep him in this conversation to show that he's a good student. And if that's the case, his next question is actually pretty pertinent, because every rabbi agrees that Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself, is important. Rabbi Akiva says it is one of the central tenets of Torah. The problem is that word neighbor. In Leviticus 19:18, if you look at it, let's all turn to our favorite book of the Bible. Leviticus 19, verse 18. You must not take... Sorry, I'll give you a second to get there. I'm going at 1,000,000 miles an hour this morning. We haven't even gotten to the parable yet. So verse 18, you must not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the children of your people, but you must love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, is the verse that gets pulled out there. Who is the neighbor? Who counts as a neighbor in that verse?
Children of your people.
Children of your people. Seems pretty clear. Because it's like, don't do vengeance or bear a grudge against the children of your neighbors. But instead love your neighbor as yourself. Let's talk about Israelites, pretty clearly. And that would be the end of the conversation, if not for the fact that further down in verse 33, we have another command here. When a foreigner resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him. The foreigner who resides with you must be to you like a native citizen among you. So you must love him as yourself, because, you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. God is always doing that in Leviticus. Just popping his name in there. Okay, so you're supposed to love your fellow Israelites as yourself. And then there's the foreigners among you. Now this raises some interesting questions. One question is, who are these people? If you read through a lot of the commentary on Leviticus 19, there are a lot of different answers on this. But most of the rabbis seem to think that this is a convert, a proselyte. Why else would he be living among your people, if not becoming part of the Jewish community to some degree? Trying to think. Yeah. And furthermore, where does righteousness fit into this? Yeah.
Why would they necessarily think that that person would be a convert?
I think that
Wasn't there trade going on, and you would have people coming through and doing business within the community?
You would. Part of this is pretty much all the land in Israel is ancestral land, so there's that. Not a lot of people like moving and buying up an apartment complex or whatever. A lot of people would come through, but not a lot of people are going to reside with you, are going to live where you live. So there's that. So a lot of the rabbis take this as be welcoming to converts, essentially. But, you want to keep other folks at an arm's length, which again makes some sense, right? Some of these people are practicing pagan worship. Some of them are oppressors. Some of them are shady folks. There's also a question of like the righteousness of these people. If someone wrongs you in some way, does that change their status? So a few quotes from a few rabbis or books here. Rabbi Ben Sirach says, "Give to the one who's good, but do not help the sinner." The book of Tobit, an important piece of Second Temple literature, says, "Place bread on the graves of the righteous, but give none to the sinner." Rabbi Nathan, who's in the Talmud, says, "If a person acts as thy people do, love him, but if not, thou shalt not love him." So there seems to be, within a lot of Jewish thought, this idea that, and kind of tied to this idea of a convert, is this idea that righteous neighbors are the people we need to pay attention to. Even if we go back to Hillel, there's probably the most famous story about Hillel, is a Gentile comes to Rabbi Hillel and says, "I will convert if you can teach me the entirety of Torah while standing on one foot." He goes to Shammai first, and Shammai tries to hit him, and so he leaves, which is a lot of the stories, by the way. Someone goes to Shammai, and Shammai's a big old doofus, and then someone goes to Hillel. Hillel stands on one foot, and he says, what does he say? "What is hateful to you, do not do to your brother. Do not do to your neighbor." So again, there's still kind of a bit of an arm's length happening here. There are certain conditions around who is a neighbor. And there is actually quite a bit of debate among the rabbis about who counts as your neighbor. So this question sounds strange to us because implicit in this question, if you're asking who is my neighbor, what you're really asking is who's not my neighbor, right? That's what's important. Who is outside the boundaries? Who do I not need to be worried about, really? Who do I not need to love as myself? So then Jesus launches into this story. Very rabbinic thing to do. So let's pull out a few things in this story. We're going to whip through this a bit faster than we normally do. There's a lot here that we're not going to be able to uncover, but you can. Luke 10, please. Here we go. But that stuff you can dig into on your own time. We're just going to give you some juicy morsels here. So first of all, the story takes place on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho. Now, when we picture this story, I think most of us picture something like this. You're in. I'm thinking back to Star Wars: A New Hope when R2-D2's going through the desert, and, turns a corner and then gets jumped, right? So maybe there's some rocks and stuff here, but you turn a corner and then
Bad news.
Not how this works. If you go to Jerusalem and that road down to Jericho today, Jerusalem first falls on a big old mountain, Mount Zion, right? It's more of a hill, but we'll give it to the authors to call it a mountain. The way that road actually looks is like this. Switchback Central. So that means a few things. If you're coming down this road and there's a guy down here, you're going to see him a long time before you get to him. And, depending on how wide these switchbacks are, as you leave, you're going to keep seeing him, right? He's still just going to be right over here. So this isn't you come upon, all of a sudden, what do? This is not like a knee-jerk moment. This is okay, we're getting closer. What do I do? Okay, we've moved past. Do I really want to keep doing this? Okay. So worth noting that there is time to meditate what to do, and there is time to turn back. Now, an important detail of this story is this. This guy gets robbed, and he is left half dead. So, a few reasons why this is important. Kenneth Bailey points out first of all, that the two main ways you know someone's like place in society, where they're from, all that stuff, is their clothes and their dialect. This guy is left naked, and he's presumably unconscious, right? He's just a naked guy in the road. Maybe you could tell if he's Jewish, but generally speaking, you don't have any of the markers you might use to like draw up a quick assessment of who this person is, right? And we get startlingly few details about him throughout. This victim, as was pointed out, is basically a blank person. The only thing that seems to be relevant about him is this. He's in need. He needs help. And he's probably going to die. Now, why this is important is because of the first two people that come by. We have a priest, most likely a Sadducee. Then we have a Levite. And then we have a Samaritan. So, good chance this priest is coming from Jerusalem to Jericho, meaning he's done his priestly duties and he's heading back wherever he came from. He comes upon a body that to him may be dead or may not be dead. Now, why is that a problem for a priest? Unclean, right? So, touching a corpse, not great. It makes you ritually unclean. You have to go through a whole process to become clean again. So, for the priest, this is both a great inconvenience and also something he's generally supposed to avoid. So, on the one hand, he's not just being a jerk. Not a total jerk. Kenneth Bailey points out that someone as important as this would have almost certainly had a donkey with them, because if we break this down into a chiasm, the Samaritan is going to do everything these guys should have done, and then undo everything the robbers did. So the priest does not give this man his donkey, the Samaritan does. The Levite does not give him any of the various balms he would have most likely had as an assistant to a priest, the Samaritan does. So, a lot of people make a lot out about the fact that, like, well, the priest doesn't want to be unclean. He values uncleanness over helping someone, so he's more Shammai than Hillel, right? However, the problem with all of that is that the law is super clear that if you can save a life, you should do it. And not only that, but if you come across a dead body, you need to bury it as soon as possible. If there's an unattended corpse, you need to bury it as soon as possible. And the priest knows this and is not exempt from it. We know that because in the Talmud, in the whole section about Nazirite vows, there is an explicit section that says if the high priest and a Nazirite are walking down the road and they see a corpse, one of them has to go get it. And there's a whole rabbinical debate about who's supposed to go between a Nazirite and a high priest, because they're both very concerned with cleanliness. But if this high priest is by himself, he is supposed to go get that body and bury it. That's his job. And conveniently for him, we know from archaeological digs that the mikveh, which are these ritual cleansing pools that you need to use to become clean, to become ritually impure, Jericho has like an absurd amount of them. So this guy doesn't want to become unclean, probably, but he has ways of dealing with that. And the law determines, or the law says that he ought to go help this person. So I say all that to say, first of all, the people listening would probably not have heard these people as negative, as we often do. This is a priest. This is a Kohanim. This is someone from the line of Aaron. And so we expect them to do the good thing, right? That's their job. And the fact that he doesn't is kind of understandable, but also wrong. He's not doing his God-given duty. Now, a Levite is someone who is assisting the priests in their work. So Bailey points out that this Levite, there's a good chance he is actually associated with this priest. He might be following along behind him for various reasons. And so there's kind of an interesting dilemma for the Levite. If the priest didn't stop to help this person, then the Levite has to kind of go against the judgment of the priest to do it. So there's kind of a question here of like, do I defy authority here? Like these two might very well meet up in Jericho later, and he's going to have like a half dead or dead body with him, and this might be kind of a dishonoring thing potentially. But incumbent upon the priest to help this person who's half dead. Same thing with the Levite. They're both supposed to help, and yet there are like understandable reasons why they don't. So, if you're listening to this story, this is kind of set up as like a blonde brunette redhead joke here. There's kind of a formula we're going with. If you read other rabbis, what is supposed to happen next? You got a priest, you got a Levite, and then who's next?
Samaritan.
Not a Samaritan. Jew, just a random Jew, just a lay person, right? As a way of kind of digging at the authorities and talking about like general piety. So that's what we would expect to come next. We've got the best of the best, the assistant to the best of the best, and then just a normal guy. But we don't get that. We get this guy. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is shocking. Jews and Samaritans do not like each other for understandable reasons. If we do a flyby here, when the Seleucids fight against Israel, the Samaritans ally with the Seleucids against Israel. When Antiochus Epiphanes takes over this area, the Samaritans turn their temple into a temple to Zeus to escape persecution instead of following Jewish law and keeping the temple what it ought to be. These Samaritans are people who were left behind by the Assyrians to be assimilated somewhat into the Assyrian culture in Israel. And maybe the worst thing, at one point, during a Passover, a bunch of Samaritans went into the temple and spread pig bones, in the temple to desecrate their temple. Because as we hear in John, the big disagreement between the Jews and the Samaritans is where the true temple is. Is it in Samaria? Is it on Mount Gerizim? Or is it in Jerusalem? Also, crucially, Samaritans are Jews who believe that everything after Torah is apocryphal. It's not part of real Torah, and the Jews have distorted Torah with all of their extra books. So these are people who like have a history of hatred towards each other. They're also just like kind of different denominations. The Samaritans are people who think the Jews are doing Judaism wrong, and they have the true pure form of Judaism, which maybe gets at our sense of maybe being offended by this. It's one thing to be like, what if this was Hamas or I don't know, some other terrible, terrible person, right? Versus, what if the third person in the story in a modern context was a MAGA hat wearing Southern Baptist fundamentalist guy, or a gay female Episcopalian priest, depending on which one of those you think is worse. This is someone who is probably, at best, maybe you're like, those people are a little weird, a little wonky how they believe. And at worst, you're like, these people are diluting our faith and are an active enemy of our faith. They're the problem in society. So Jesus has this person be the guy who helps, the guy who actually follows the command to love neighbor as self. A guy who doesn't believe any of the right things, and is from the wrong people group, lives in the wrong place, practices the wrong kind of religion. And this guy goes above and beyond. He puts this guy on his donkey. He pours oil and wine on him, which in that day would be medicinal to some degree. Sounds weird to us. But I don't know the mechanics of how that works. I think the wine is supposed to be sterilizing, and the oil is supposed to be soothing.
Yeah, alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol is good for that. And then brings him all the way into a Jewish territory. Kenneth Bailey compares this to, imagine a Native American finds a cowboy with 2 arrows in his back, throws him on his horse, and rides him into a town owned by other cowboys to get him help. Who's in danger in that situation? Native American, right? This is a dangerous thing. It's easy to misinterpret what's happened. So the Samaritan is going above and beyond. When he goes to the inn, he makes sure that this person is getting continuous care, right? He puts him at the inn and says, anything else he needs, I'll pay for when I get back. So this is not like a slap a bandage on it or like give him, $5 or a Nature Valley bar or whatever. This is going wildly out of your way, spending quite a bit of your resources, and putting yourself in physical danger to get this guy to safety. A guy who there's no guarantee would do any of that for you if he's Jewish, presumably. So, a bunch of things here. This is ongoing. It is not necessarily in this guy's best interest. And of course, someone else might come along later, right? Someone else might come along to help him. There's no reason it has to be you. So this is the picture we get. Where it's not just like going from the top of the food chain to like the layperson, but we're going to like an enemy of the people who does the right thing. And then we get to what's really interesting is Jesus takes this question that the guy asked originally, because the original question is, who is my neighbor? Who counts as the person I'm supposed to love as myself? Who doesn't count? And Jesus turns that around and he says, which of these 3 do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And what does the teacher of the law say?
Show the most mercy.
Yeah. Notice what he doesn't say. If you were answering that question, what would you say? The Samaritan, right? He doesn't say that. Now, there's 2 ways to read that, as there often is. One is he's so disgusted by the fact that this is a Samaritan that he doesn't want to say it, right? He doesn't want to admit that a Samaritan might have done a good thing to a guy. But the other way of reading it is maybe this guy gets what Jesus is saying. Maybe this lands for him. Because what Jesus is saying, this guy asks, who is my neighbor? And Jesus fully rejects the premise of the question. He says, you're asking the wrong question, if that's what you're asking. Klein Snodgrass puts this really well. This man wants to define a neighbor. If I look around, who counts as my neighbor? And Jesus says, wrong question. The right question is, who can I become a neighbor to? A neighbor is not a category of people that tick a certain number of boxes to warrant a certain amount of attention or help or care or whatever. Jesus is fundamentally uninterested in that. Notably, he's also fundamentally uninterested in othering anyone, which in light of a very hotly contested election where there was a lot of othering on both sides is something for us to think about. Jesus has no part in othering people, in treating other people as those people. The question is not on, does this person deserve my attention, but rather, can I be a neighbor to that person? Can I show that person neighborliness? There's a word that shows up here that showed up in the prodigal son. When the Samaritan comes upon the man, are we going to talk about this or are we going to talk about that? We'll talk about both. When he comes upon the man, it says he has compassion. That word, again, is that Greek word, splagnizomai. It's the same word that the father feels when he sees his son coming back. That's hitting me. Okay. That word literally has the image is like something deep in your gut, like a feeling of pain that drives you to do something. right? It's aching to help. And crucially, Jesus splagnetomai all over the gospel. And whenever he does it, whenever he talks about someone else doing it, it's always followed by action. It seems that in the opinion of every gospel writer, you cannot just feel compassion towards someone. Compassion, that aching, is always followed by this. That's true compassion, is moving to action. Because the Levite and the priest might have been like, oh, poor guy. Moved on. Hopefully somebody will help him. But the Samaritan, splagnetomai. He not only has that feeling of pity or compassion, but he's moved to act. Two other things I want to pull out here. This has been a little bit disjointed, but these two things are quite cool and worth doing. And you get to watch me try and write Hebrew, which is quite bad. There's an interesting way that Jesus talks to the teacher of the law in the beginning of this dialogue. The teacher says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus' answer is weird, because he doesn't just say, well, what do you think? He says, well, what is written in the law? How do you read it? That's a little weird, right? Because you could just say what's written in the law. But he seems to put emphasis on this idea of like reading. So there's a fun thing that rabbis do all the time. Because a fun little piece of trivia about Hebrew is that there are no vowels. There are no like letter vowels in Hebrew. Instead, what you have are consonants that you add little vowelization marks to. And what that means, sorry if anyone in here is even remotely cares about Jewish calligraphy, because I am about to make an absolute mockery of it. I'm sorry. This is meant as an act of love, not mocking. So these two words look the same, except for that. So these are two different words, but at a glance they look the same. And when the rabbis read through Scripture, they notice this a lot. That when two words that look very similar are kind of put close to each other, that suggests a relationship between them. That this is a way that the authors of the Hebrew Bible kind of point us to little hidden pieces of treasure. Now here's what's interesting. This word, ra'ah, means neighbor. This word, which is pronounced similarly but a bit differently, and I didn't write it down, so I'm not going to try, means evil. So, interesting question for this teacher of the law. When you see this, how do you read it? Right? Hidden in Torah is this little question of when you see another person, do you see this or do you see this? And Jesus seems to be pointing one way rather than another. So that's a fun little thing. Last fun little thing. I'll throw this to you first. We're not going to have time to go into a remez right now, but if you want it, go check out 2 Chronicles 28. Because the fun fact about the Good Samaritan is this story has happened before, except the last time it happened, it was during a war, and it was about 200,000 people, not one person, where the Samaritans took pity on the people of Judah and bound their wounds, put them on donkeys, and returned them home. Beautiful story, worth looking into. Also a horrifying story at the same time. So worth thinking about why is Jesus pulling that out here. But I'm going to leave you with this last... oh, man. Two things. I'm going to be quick. Two things. So one, there's one really interesting distinction in how Jesus talks about the Levite, the priest, and the Samaritan. And it has to do with where they go. So if you look at the priest, verse 31, a priest was going down that road, he sees the injured man, and he passed by on the other side. The Levite came up to the place and saw him, and then passed by on the other side. The Samaritan came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he felt compassion for him. So notice that there's a distance here. The priest never even really approaches the man at all. He crosses over to the other side pretty much immediately when he sees the body in the road. Because remember, he's got ways to be able to do that. The Levite at least comes close, but then when he gets close, he shifts over. The Samaritan gets all the way up to where that guy is. So I think there's maybe one little application for us here. That if we're struggling with compassion for people, whoever that is that you struggle with compassion for, I'm sure none of you do. I do sometimes. Maybe part of it is that there are certain people that you only see from a distance, that you only hear talked about on cable news or whatever, or in certain circles, but that you've never spoken to yourself. Or maybe, in more of a Levitical sense, maybe there's people you've heard about and you've read about, and maybe you talk to them, but you don't really get to where they are. You see them as the thing that they're labeled as, but you're not really talking to them. You're maybe more seeing them as a project to be dealt with or a person to be corrected or something like that. Whereas the Samaritan comes to where the person is. People who maybe fall into this or that bad camp in your mind, if you're struggling with compassion for them, maybe an antidote to that is to just talk to them as a person, to go to where they are. Because Jesus seems to be alluding to something about distance as being an important part of what dictates compassion or not compassion. Okay, last thing. I'm speed running all this at the end. But this one is very, very cool. This word, splagnitomai, has a Hebrew equivalent, rashem, and it's the Hebrew word for compassion. And the Hebrew word for compassion comes from the root word for womb. So to be compassionate towards someone is to be womb-like toward them. And Rabbi David Foreman, when he talks about this, he says there's the question of justice and there's the question of compassion. The question of justice is, what do you deserve? And if a womb was to be just towards a child doesn't deserve anything. A baby, it can't contribute anything to society, right? It has no leg to stand on, literally. But a womb asks, what can you become? It sees the potential in someone to be more than they are now. And interestingly, this word is most associated with the Spirit of God. Actually, this same Greek word for coming upon the man is the same word that Genesis uses for when the Spirit comes upon the waters in Genesis 1. The Spirit goes right into the chaos of the formless and void, into the darkness, and brings life out of it. And so in the same way, this is the disposition that Jesus calls us to have toward other people. Is to not ask well, what have they done to deserve my attention? But rather, to look at them as a person of potential. Final thought as we're closing here. There are a lot of people who take this parable and they read the conclusion to it as, well, Jesus is painting a picture of compassion that is so wild, so crazy, that surely what he's telling us is we can't live up to that compassion. And so instead he's driving us toward the cross, right? Man, I disagree with that because of how Jesus ends the parable. What is the very last thing that Jesus says in verse 37? Go and do the same. I don't think there's a magic trick there. Is this hard? Yeah. Is it crazy? Yeah. But Jesus tells you to do it. Honestly, it's not hard to understand. It's just hard to do. And should that drive us to the cross? Absolutely. But not to excuse ourselves from being compassionate, but to give us the encouragement we need to jump back in and be compassionate without drowning in self-pity and self-guilt. Whew, that was we're over time, but thank you so much for sticking with me there. Let's breath prayer this one, and we'll pray it out and head on our way.